You guys ready? Good. Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. I'd ask everybody rise, join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everybody. The purpose of today's hearing is to hear from the Undersecretary overseeing the Bureau of Industry and Security regarding the Trump administration's budget request for BIS in fiscal year 27. In particular, the discussion will cover the AI arms race against the Chinese Communist Party and the importance of Information and Communications Technology and Services Office, which reviews foreign technology threats. And I'm going to now recognize myself for an opening statement. Undersecretary Kessler, welcome to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome back, I should say, to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You've been here before. This hearing is about beating the Chinese Communist Party in the AI arms race. It is a race that we can't lose. I think we all recognize that. We, the United States of America, and our great industries like Anthropic got to Mythos first. But we all know that China is trying to steal our technology any way that they can, like Mythos as an example. And we know that that's already old technology. We will see models far more powerful than Mythos soon. And if we don't act now, China might beat us to the next advanced AI model. They already unleashed COVID on us, and I have no doubt that they are waiting to release the next super COVID, if that's what they could develop, or a missile defense Mythos that could get around any golden dome that the United States of America has. When CIA Director John Radcliffe says that the frontier models are developing capabilities akin to digital nuclear weapons, I take that very seriously. When Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says CXMT and Alibaba are Chinese military companies and that AI will redefine the character of military affairs over the next decade, I take that very seriously. These are real battlefields and real casualties. Today, it's Ukraine, Iran, Venezuela. Tomorrow, potentially Taiwan and China. Those are the stakes of the AI arms race. President Trump has been clear about how to win. Stop the commies in Beijing from getting or using our crown jewel technologies against us. BIS is the tip of the spear in this tech war. The BIS Undersecretary is not just a sheriff enforcing pre-existing rules. He is the lead general in the AI arms race, tasked with designing and enforcing strategies to fulfill the commander's guidance. President Trump has issued 4 main goals for BIS as a commander's guidance. 1, no black wells for China. 2, close export control loopholes as stated in the America First Trade Policy Memo. 3, tighten controls on chip-making equipment and stop our allies from undermining our export controls from the AI Action Plan. 4, no Chinese military end users or remote access as stated in the national security conditions in the H-200 rule. These are the President's metrics for success. We need to know now what BIS needs to get the job done, and I mean the entire job, not just one part of it. Success is not stopping only some of the black wells smuggled into China. It means stopping all of them. Success isn't stopping some chip-making tools from Chinese AI chip makers. It means stopping all of the advanced tools. Success means putting every company that Department of War has identified as a Chinese military company on the entity list. Why? Because they are looking to create every AI inroad they can to accessing every American bank account, every American stock portfolio, every municipal water treatment center, all for the purpose of being able to cause destruction. Those are the stakes. They're looking to be able to more quickly assess every capability in the Pacific against the United States of America's military. The House Foreign Affairs Committee has done its part. We've marked up more than 20 export control bills to execute on the commander's guidance. And to be clear, these bills we're pushing on this committee are being proposed because they need to be there to get the job done. That's why we are proposing these bills. We support the president's request to increase BIS's budget because that's what is needed to get the job done in this high-stakes race. There have been significant enforcement successes. Stopping approvals of licenses for blacklisted companies is an important achievement, and we congratulate you on the work that you've done there. But key orders from the president need to be fulfilled 100%. BIS has not added entities to the list in 2025 since October of 25. We need to see more of those entities added to the list. It is important that BIS makes licensing decisions, including denials, in a timely manner and provides clarity to American businesses. That is something that we want to support you on. BIS and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, working together, have to carry out the president's vision. We have to win this new Cold War against the commies in Beijing that are trying to steal everything that they can, and you are the shield from preventing them from stealing everything that they can. I thank you for coming today, Undersecretary, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I would ask now unanimous consent that the member from Michigan, Chairman of the Committee on CCP, Chairman Molinar, be advanced to sit on the dais and participate in today's hearing without objection. Chair now recognizes, actually I will say this first because Ranking Member Meeks is not here right now. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have you, Undersecretary for Industry and Security, Jeffrey Kessler, before us today. Thank you for joining us again. Your full statements will be made a part of the record. I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for members' questions. And I'll also thank you for the times that you've joined us in the skiff as well to give us classified briefing. You made yourself very accessible, and we appreciate that. And I now recognize you for any opening statement that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you all. Let me start by offering my condolences to you, to this body, on the passing of your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham, a statesman and a patriot whose service elevated and strengthened the country. Chairman Mast and distinguished members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on the fiscal year 2027 President's budget request for the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security. BIS's mission is to safeguard the crown jewels of the American economy, our critical technology and supply chains. Under the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Lutnick, BIS is fulfilling this mission more strongly than ever. Consider the enforcement of our export laws. Before the Trump administration, the penalties for export violations were anemic. Licenses were being rubber-stamped, even for sensitive technologies and entity-listed companies. Too many in the business community viewed export controls as a cost of doing business, not a reason to change behavior. All of that has changed dramatically under this administration. From 2024 to 2025, the total monetary penalties imposed by BIS increased more than 18-fold, from $16 million in 2024 to $324 million in 2025. And in 2026, we've already doubled the amount of administrative penalties imposed compared to 2025. BIS's enforcement unit has closed out several landmark cases. Within the past year, BIS announced a $252 million settlement with Applied Materials on a case involving the illegal transshipment of semiconductor manufacturing equipment, a $95 million administrative penalty on Cadence Design Systems in a case involving the illegal export of semiconductor design software, and a settlement agreement totaling $36 million in penalties in a Bosch case involving the diversion of microelectronics and automotive software to a company on the entity list. In addition to these civil resolutions, our agents, BIS agents, helped obtain indictments charging 3 individuals in a multi-billion-dollar scheme to divert servers containing advanced semiconductors through Southeast Asia. The problem now is that our resources are spread too thin, and we need more resources. Our enforcement officials are overburdened. They have more cases and more leads than they can handle, and more than their peers more than their counterparts at peer law enforcement agencies. BIS's enforcement unit should be orders of magnitude larger to safeguard critical technologies more effectively. And that's why the President's budget requests an increase for BIS's enforcement unit from $122 million in fiscal year 2026 to $301 million in fiscal year 2027, a 147% increase. This would enable the enforcement unit to increase from 299 positions to 669 positions. It would also enable BIS to increase the number of enforcement officials stationed overseas from 25 to 65. This appropriation would be a historic step toward transforming the agency to handle the national security mission that we have more effectively. The President's budget also seeks smaller but important increases in appropriations for BIS's Export Administration Unit, which handles licensing and supply chain investigations. This includes an $11.7 million increase in 38 positions to add specialized engineers and technical experts to support enforcement by performing the technical assessments and licensing determinations that form the basis for enforcement actions. It also includes an additional $20 million to support BIS's Section 232 program to revitalize industries that are critical to national security. President Trump has revolutionized Section 232. In his first term, he used it to address the security threats posed by foreign steel and aluminum imports. And now in the second term, BIS is using Section 232 more aggressively than ever, resulting in a manufacturing renaissance that's rebuilding our domestic industrial base, hiring American workers, and strengthening our national security. BIS has launched more than a dozen investigations, and the President imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, autos, trucks, and lumber, with other sectors under consideration. Though we've instituted tariffs to address the national security threats, the benefits to the American people are enormous, and the administration has leveraged the authority to spur hundreds of billions of dollars in new investment in these critical supply chains. New factories are springing up across the country, including crude steel-making capacity, aluminum plants, reshored auto factories, massive new investments in semiconductor and pharmaceutical production, and an additional $20 million investment in the group at BIS that administers Section 232 is well worth the investment. Let me now turn to the Office of Information and Communications Technology and Services, or OICTS. This office is responsible for mitigating foreign adversary threats in the supply chain. OICTS is implementing an industry-wide regulation, the first of its kind, to limit foreign adversary presence in supply chains. It's called the Connected Vehicles Rule. This rule prohibits foreign adversary software in U.S. passenger vehicles starting in model year 2027, which is what's being built now. It also prohibits foreign adversary connected hardware in U.S. passenger vehicles starting in model year 2030. BIS's enforcement of this rule has already made Americans safer. Following discussions with BIS, several auto companies have decided to excise foreign adversary technology from their U.S. product offerings. These companies understand that BIS will not tolerate a risk of sabotage or data exfiltration in the cars that everyday Americans drive, and they have changed their business plans accordingly. OICTS is currently heavily focused on implementing the Connected Vehicles Rule correctly, and in the future we expect the administration of this rule to become more routinized, and as that happens, OICTS will consider creating new regimes for other sectors that also have risks to their supply chains. And overall, we expect the volume of work at OICTS to remain steady from fiscal year 26 to 27, and that's why the President's budget doesn't request an increase for OICTS. I look forward to continuing the great work, the great collaboration that BIS has done with this committee, and working with you all to make sure that BIS has the tools and the staff and the resources that it needs to keep America safe and to sustain our national and economic security. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Undersecretary Kessler. I will now recognize myself for questioning, and we will alternate between Republicans and Democrats for questioning throughout this hearing. I want to begin by this. You talked about the increase for the BIS budget. I think we could easily see the need to double it beyond the number that we're doubling it to right now because of the nature of the threat that is going on right here and the importance of this to the globe. So we know for a fact China is getting its hands on our most advanced AI technologies. It's not hyperbole. China has smuggled in thousands of Blackwell chips. They've smuggled them, and they work to smuggle them every day. It is accessing perhaps hundreds of thousands of Blackwells through data centers in places like Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand. They are working to do this on a daily basis in other countries. And they have access to technology from the US and its allies to make its own chips, and they're trying to get that access through other allied countries on a daily basis. These are what China is working at every single day. That is the way at which they present the threat to your office. That is why President Trump issued the America First Trade Policy Memorandum and the AI Action Plan, where he told BIS, close loopholes, strengthen export controls on chip-making equipment, and it has been a year since that commander's guidance, and I would like an update on this from you on where we're at. So just number one, have you aligned allied controls to U.S. controls? And tell us about your use of the foreign direct product rule in doing so, please.
Absolutely, thank you. We at BIS, we have made significant progress on several of the areas that you mentioned. When it comes to export controls, for example, on semiconductor manufacturing equipment, one of the most significant changes that we've made is to start applying the appropriate level of scrutiny to export licenses involving that technology and export licenses involving exports to entity-listed companies. One of the things that surprised me when I was in my office is to learn that the prior administration had granted thousands of export licenses to entity-listed companies.
Is a problem. Can
Major
you get
problem.
to 100%?
I'm sorry?
Can you get to 100% enforcement?
Well, that's always the goal, and I agree with you that that's the benchmark by which we should be judged. To get to 100% enforcement, we do need additional resources. We are too small of an agency. We know, and I testified to the same thing a year ago, we know that we're only capturing the tip of the iceberg. We have shut down smuggling schemes. We have imposed major penalties on those who smuggle and divert our advanced technology. But unfortunately, there's a lot of illegal activity going on that we haven't stopped yet. And we need a massive increase in the enforcement resources to be able to do that.
And much of that illegal activity is through Chinese military end users. As you well know, you probably know these companies better than most members of Congress. You have to deal with them on a daily basis. We deal with 100 other things. Secretary of War Hegseth has stated publicly, Alibaba, Tencent, CXMT, YMTC, and more, they work directly for the Chinese military. So what does that mean for BIS policy when he identifies them as working directly for the Chinese military? How do you qualify them as military end users so that we don't sell them that technology?
Look, we have to be realistic whenever we are thinking about exports into China. I think we all recognize that the government has significant control, exercises significant control over companies in the private sector there. We don't have any illusions about that. So we have to be very careful when we allow exports to there or to other country group D countries.
Do you see those companies that I just listed as Chinese military end users, Alibaba, Tencent, CXMT, YMTC?
I see those companies as playing an important role in the strategy of China to develop its indigenous
Are they Chinese
AI
military?
industry.
We know that Chinese has a fusion civil military use constantly. Any place that they can fuse civil and military, they do. So
Look, I believe these companies are on the 1260H list. YMTC is on the entity list. Obviously, these companies
Alibaba
have
and
close ties,
Tencent?
also on the 1260H list, right?
So these are Chinese military end users.
Well, military end user is a technical designation under our rules.
Do you assess them to be Chinese military end users like the Secretary of War does?
I completely agree with the Secretary of War.
That they are Chinese military end users?
I will go and look at his statement and see exactly what he said. You know, look, these companies
He said
obviously, they
that
coordinate very
Alibaba,
closely.
Tencent, CXMT, and YMTC work directly for the Chinese military.
Then I'm sure that that is correct.
My time has expired. Ranking Member Meeks, I believe you wanted to give a statement and ask your question.
Yes. And first, I just want to welcome to the committee Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Representative Bell, and Representative Duncan, Pocan to the committee, and glad to have you here. Thank you. Let me thank you, Chairman, for hosting this critical hearing under Secretary Kessler. I want to welcome you and thank you for appearing today, and also thank you, actually, you're one of the individuals from the administration that have come to my office several times to talk and try to work things out, and I want you to know that I do really appreciate that, and hopefully that we'll continue. You know, of course, I've got a lot of questions for you, and since the last time you testified in front of this committee, which was nearly a year ago, I think much has changed, and you're here to, I guess, to justify the President's budget request for BIS. That requires us to examine BIS's record over the past 18 months and answer the many questions before this committee and provide the American people with a clear accounting of what BIS has accomplished and where it has fallen short. I've been deeply concerned by the Trump administration's mismanagement of export controls. Rather than treating export controls as one of our most important national security tools, the President has turned them into a bargaining chip in broader negotiations with China. And as a result, the administration has issued virtually no significant new export control rules with respect to China and Russia, despite being in office for a year and a half. Instead, it has weakened existing safeguards, including by approving licenses for advanced AI chips destined for China. Moreover, the administration hasn't added a single entity to the entity list since last October. And according to CSIS, this marks the longest period of entity list inactivity since 2008, when export controls was nowhere near the center of our national security strategy. The Biden administration added nearly 1,600 entities to the entity list. President Trump and Secretary Lutnick have added only 140 in a year and a half. Are we supposed to believe that Russia and Chinese companies are no longer trying to acquire sensitive technology for military and other malign purposes? In your testimony, you mentioned the need to codify the Office of Information and Communications Technology and Services, also known as ICTS, yet many of the China actions and rules that office was developing have been shelved or rejected. As a result, the office has not unveiled a single new rule during the second Trump administration. The policy paralysis and negligence at BIS got so bad that Chairman Mast was compelled to organize a 24-bill export controls markup in April. That raises an obvious question. Why should Congress drastically increase the budget for an agency that has failed to fully use the authorities it already has? I hope you will be able to answer that question today. But it's not just the policy that concerns me. Under Secretary Lutnick's watch, BIS has become less effective and less transparent, which have been unacceptable delays in license reviews, which are harming our economy and technology leadership. Engagement with industry is at an all-time low, making compliance and cooperation difficult. Just last month, BIS had to issue guidance reminding companies that it was still enforcing its own rules because many companies were no longer sure. Major policy actions are increasingly being implemented through private letters to individual companies rather than transparent rules that apply equally to everyone. Legitimate questions about consistency, accountability, and whether export controls are being applied fairly. And we have seen years of expertise and know-how pushed out or leave voluntarily because of mismanagement and declining morale within the agency. The bottom line is simple. BIS is not meeting its missions, as I can see it. Under Secretary Lutnick's leadership, BIS has dropped the ball on rulemaking and entity list designations while focusing entirely on enforcement. And enforcement is indispensable, let's be clear about that. But it is far less effective when the underlying rules are outdated and ineffective. The President's budget request largely doubles down on that imbalance by emphasizing enforcement while doing little to address the underlying policy deficiencies. And so I've long been an advocate for more funding and resources for BIS, but before Congress provides a significant funding increase, this administration must demonstrate that BIS is effectively using the authorities and resources it already has. So I look forward to our discussion today and questions. So, I'll go straight to questions. So I want to know, and my first question to you is how many licenses has BIS approved for the H200 and equivalent chips sales to China?
Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks. That information is confidential, but we have provided disclosures to the committee that list the license applications for the H200 and its equivalents that we've received and the status of each. So I just refer you to our confidential submissions.
Okay. So you have provided, your staff has provided it, but it's confidential or
times.
classified? Is that what you're saying about, is that what
Confidential.
you mean? It's not classified?
I don't think it's classified. It's confidential.
We have it available in the skiff.
Okay. As of today, have shipments of the H200s or equivalent chips started to China or Hong Kong?
To my knowledge, yes, but very few. And
Okay,
that's
so you
something
don't-
that we provided. We provided we provided a confidential update recently to the committee on that.
So there have been shipments, but you say it is not, so we don't know. Do you know how many license approvals have led to the shipment thus far?
We do. And again, we've given that information to the committee, and I'm happy to provide it to you in a confidential setting.
Again, okay. But we cannot, the American people, it's all confidential and/or in the skiff.
That's because
I'm
of
trying to be transparent.
Well, that's because of the statute and the rules around publicly disclosing information related to license applications. There are restrictions on my and my agency's ability to publicly disclose information about license applications, but we do try to make it available to the committee, and we have done that. But I think for the American people, the bottom line is very few shipments against licenses for H200s and equivalents have taken place. It's a very small quantity of chips, so it's trivial, a trivial amount.
Well, I just think, and I will take advantage if the chairman says it's in the skiff, I will do that, but I would hope that we could be transparent to the American people so that everyone would know. So, per the Export Administration's regulations, the EAR, the Department of Defense, Energy, and State have the authority to review any license application submitted under the EAR for every single H200 license BIS has approved to date. So whatever that number is, they have the authority to review, license, and the applications that's been submitted. So my question to you is, did all three agencies formally review and sign off?
Well, all four agencies review license applications for the H200 and provide their recommendations. So that's the process that we follow.
So all three checked off on it?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the positions that agencies took in a deliberative context, but all the agencies review all the H200 and equivalent license applications that we receive.
Well, shouldn't we know? Because I need to know, and I think the American people need to know whether any agency's opposition, for example, was overridden, or was any agency simply never given the opportunity to review. We need to, we have oversight responsibilities here in the United States Congress. And so that's our jobs. And so to not know whether or not all three agencies checked off on this as required by law, and or whether or not they had the opportunity to review is something that we need to know. Can you give us an answer to that?
Well, I'm testifying now that all agencies have the opportunity to review these licenses, and also that the positions and the views that each agency takes in the context of an interagency discussion is deliberative, and I'm not going to comment on it.
Again, transparency. Let me just ask this. Last month, the Department of Defense published its latest Chinese military companies list. Interestingly, since December, BIS has approved licenses to sell H200 chips to at least 4 companies that are on that list, including 3 that were just added last month by this very administration. Can you explain why BIS approved licenses for H200 sales to companies that the Department of Defense deems to be Chinese military companies?
We grant H200 licenses based on a rule that we issued in January, which explains the criteria that we examine for reviewing these licenses on a case-by-case basis rather than a presumption of denial. And the applicant has to meet rigorous national security requirements, including making sure that the chips actually perform at the level that they're supposed to perform at and not higher, getting inspections, domestic availability of comparable chips, and so on. So that regulation has the basis for the decisions that we make in any particular case.
Mr.
And and there have been, just to be clear, I mean, there are cases where we approve the license applications we receive. There are cases where we deny the license applications we receive. So we examine each one closely on a case-by-case basis.
Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I'd just like unanimous consent to submit into the record the Department of Defense's 2026 list of Chinese military companies that was published on June 8th, 2026, and the Federal Register notice from January.
Without objection.
I yield back.
Representative Biggs is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Undersecretary Kessler, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your leadership at BIS in putting American national security and our American workers first. The connected vehicles rule is exactly the kind of bold action that President Trump promised the American people. Using our full authority to keep the Chinese Communist Party out of our critical infrastructure and out of our driveways. It should terrify every single American to think that Beijing could remotely access or even control cars on our roads. And I want to commend BIS' recent decision to deny the EV company Polestar, which is owned by Communist China's Geely, authorization to sell 2027 model year vehicles in our country. I raise this because it matters directly to my home state of South Carolina. The Polestar 3 is built in Charleston in the same plant that builds Volvo vehicles. And Volvo has been owned by Geely since 2010. BIS approved Volvo to keep selling here while denying Polestar. I don't doubt there are good reasons for that distinction, but South Carolina auto workers, the suppliers, and dealers, they have naturally been asking what separates a yes from a no, and I think giving them the clarity would help BIS's mission. So I have 3 questions. The first, even in general terms, what separated the Volvo approval from the Polestar denial so that our manufacturers have a clear roadmap to follow?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. There's a general prohibition on the import of technology, software, starting in model year 2027, that has foreign adversary technology. And we were able to reach an agreement, a specific authorization with Volvo that we believe is very strong, very robust, and effectively mitigates the national security risks that we believed otherwise would have existed. We just were not able to reach that kind of agreement with other companies that we have denied, and that's the difference. The details of those are confidential.
Thank you. So secondly, are there other China-linked automakers currently under BIS's review through the same process?
There have been multiple companies in similar situations that are before us, both automakers and suppliers.
Okay, my third question. As South Carolina continues to grow as an automotive manufacturing powerhouse, how is BIS making sure this rule keeps the Chinese Communist Party out of our supply chains while ensuring that America wins the future of the auto industry?
Well, I think it's about creating and standing up this strong new rule and then enforcing it effectively. And that's exactly what our office, our OICTS office, is doing right now. This is a whole new program, a first of its kind rule under this authority. There's never been this type of program established under this legal authority. We're setting up right now the enforcement apparatus to make sure that importers and dealers and manufacturers all adhere to the rules, that when we enter into an agreement like the one that I referenced with Volvo, that the terms are abided by. I think strong enforcement of this rule and continuing to work closely with industry is how we make sure it remains successful.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Representative Keating, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kessler, are you familiar with the UAE-based company G42?
I am.
Are you aware of who the chairman of that G42 is?
I am.
Who is that?
I believe it is Peng Shao.
Sheikh Tanoon, in other ways.
Sheikh Tanoon?
Yeah. Are you aware of his other position, Sheikh Tanoon's other position with UAE government?
I'm aware that he has a position with the
And what
UAE
is that
government.
position?
I don't know offhand.
He's National Security Advisor. So are you aware also that in the course of export controls, the very powerful semiconductor chip deal that was done in May, did you have other discussions as a member of the administration with other members of the administration on that change for those very powerful, sensitive computer chips that we were worried about getting in the hands of the Chinese? You must have had some discussions with other members of the administration.
All major decisions that BIS makes, we make in consultation with.
So who did you discuss
partners
that with in the administration, sir?
Which decision are you asking about?
About the approval to G42 and Sheikh Tanoon about these computer chips that are great security concerns and being in the hands of the Chinese. Who made that decision? Who made that decision?
So when the Commerce Department makes a consequential decision.
So you're aware, but did you have any discussions at all with Steve Witkoff, who's the envoy in the area? Certainly, he would be someone that you'd have a discussion with if you were dealing with G42 transfers and dealing with that area, since he's the envoy in the Middle East.
I'm not going to comment.
Why not?
I'm not going to comment.
Why not?
I'm not going to comment on discussions.
Why not? It's very relevant, sir.
Trying to answer your question.
You just said you're not going to comment. I'm asking why.
My answer is that I'm not going to comment on discussions that I had or didn't have with any particular
Good, I'm not
individual.
asking you to comment on the discussions. I'm asking you
Administration.
who you discussed it with. Did you have a discussion with Steve Witkoff? I don't care what you said to him. First answer the question. It's no security risk. It's no confidentiality. He's the envoy in the Middle East. Did you have a discussion with Steve Witkoff?
Respectfully, sir, I'm trying to answer your question.
No, you're not. You're trying to avoid it, frankly.
I'm trying to tell you that I'm not going to disclose the content of deliberations
I'm not
that
asking
I
you the
have.
content, sir.
not
I'm
gonna-
first asked you, did
I'm
you
not
have
gonna
the
provide a
conversation?
chronology.
At least you can share that with us.
I'm not going to provide a chronology.
You're not, no,
or an
I didn't ask for
inventory of
chronology. I
individuals.
asked you, did you have a conversation with Steve Witkoff?
Respectfully, sir,
There's
I'm
no
not gonna-
respect here if you don't answer the question, sir.
I'm trying to tell you that I am
No,
not
you're
going
not.
to
You're
provide-
trying not to answer. So tell me the
not-
basic question. Did you have a discussion with Steve Witkoff? That's pretty simple.
I'm not going to provide an inventory of the
I didn't ask you
individuals-
for any inventory. I didn't ask you for content. I asked you a pretty simple question. Did you have a discussion with Steve Witkoff?
I believe that you're asking for information about.
Oh, no, don't believe
discussion-
what I'm asking. Answer what I'm actually asking.
I don't want to provide.
You don't want to
information-
provide. Of course you don't. Tell me the simple answer. This is so elementary.
Yeah, I'm not gonna
It's
provide
not covered
information
by
about-
any confidentiality. It's not anything. I'm not asking
Absolutely
for
is.
content.
You're
I'm
asking
asking
about-
for an answer.
You're asking about deliberations that.
No,
led to a
I'm not
decision?
asking about deliberations. I'm simply asking you, had you had a conversation with Steve Witkoff about this? I'm not asking you content, deliberations. You can't answer that question.
Look, I've given you my answer. I'm
No,
not gonna-
you haven't, sir. How can you say you're giving him the answer? There's nothing more fundamental or simple than I'm asking you.
I'm
Did
not
you
gonna-
have a conversation with Steve Witkoff about this?
I'm not going to provide an inventory
Why?
of individuals.
Why aren't you doing that, sir?
Because it's deliberative. It's deliberative. Right?
It is not deliberative
It
if you
is.
had a conversation.
I'm not going to provide an inventory.
You're evading the answer, sir. Why are you evading the answer?
Because it's.
Why are
deliberative.
you evading the answer? Could it be the conflict of interest is there with Witkoff and World Financial and the Trump administration, which the president personally benefited by? Could it be that? Could it
I'd
be a
be-
fear? Are you afraid to give an answer, sir?
I'd be happy to give you an explanation.
You're not happy to give me an answer. I can't believe
Let's
that
talk
you
about-
won't even
let's talk
admit
about the
if you had a
UAE
conversation with
talk about
Steve
the
Witkoff
UAE
about this.
decision that we
Mr.
took
Chairman,
last
I
week.
yield back.
Representative Davidson is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kessler, for being here today and for just providing clarity about the role the administration's doing to protect our national security, and I appreciate you doing that. One of the things that we spent a lot of energy on is getting an export control framework together. We worked, across not just State Department, but Commerce, Treasury. This is kind of a whole of government effort, and the budget needs to increase to be able to accommodate those kinds of roles. Could you give us an update on how that's going and how important it is to not only create the authorization, but to fund the office that you guys need to provide this oversight?
Well, absolutely. Well, enforcement is really at the heart of the work that BIS does. Enforcement is the reason that that the export control regime is effective. Enforcement is what creates the incentive for companies to comply, and it's what keeps the technology that we all care about out of the hands of our adversaries. Now, we have surged enforcement, thanks in part to the additional appropriations that Congress has provided for fiscal year 26. We've hired a huge number of people just this year already, around 70 people, and we plan to continue hiring throughout the year. But as I mentioned in my opening testimony, I think that BIS ought to be orders of magnitude bigger to effectively fulfill its enforcement mandate. And we know that our enforcement officers are overburdened. We know that there is illegal activity happening that we're not able to stop because of the paucity of resources. And so we're asking Congress, the President's budget asked Congress for an additional significant increase in resources so that we can continue transforming BIS into an enforcement powerhouse.
Thank you for that, and thanks for the additional explanation. And look, one of the things we want to do is make sure we have bright line, clear things, so there's not some unambiguous standard out there that it's not regulation by enforcement, but companies are clear on what they're supposed to do. Toward that end, I've passed, working to pass a bill, the Biological Intellectual Property Protection Act, that would restrict the export of U.S. intellectual property and sensitive information related to synthetic biology to foreign entities like China. We know this has happened in the past. We're concerned that it could happen in the future. How important is it to have bright lines? Does that make enforcement easier?
Well, it sounds like it would be helpful, and I'm happy to take a look at the legislation and work with your office on it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one of the early enforcement actions really has been AI, and one of the most important technologies we're trying to restrict is related to computing, whether it's quantum computing, chips, technology, but artificial intelligence is a bit of an arms race of sorts with China, and sort of a rapid enforcement action against a version of Claude happened already. So I know that the details of those discussions and negotiations are confidential or classified generally on some of these things, but could you go into the kinds of things that are considered as you're trying to take an urgent enforcement action like that?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that we expect of companies that are involved in developing frontier models is that they follow the procedure and the policy that's set out in the President's executive order on AI from June. That's an important step, both in ensuring the security of the models and in instilling confidence in the government that if there are vulnerabilities, that we uncover them, we know about them, and we're prepared to deal with them. The government has several bodies that work with companies to evaluate the security of frontier models, including CASE at the Department of Commerce, not in BIS, but it's at the Department of Commerce. And so we encourage companies developing these types of models to work with us closely.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then, I think one of the concerns a lot of my constituents have is their data, their private information. Frankly, they're concerned about our own government collecting their information. They're concerned about companies monetizing and harvesting it. Some of that's outside of your control. We need a domestic privacy bill. But when you look at crossing the border, how are we protecting Americans' sensitive, personally identifiable information, geolocation data, all kinds of things that you can buy from data brokers? How are we limiting the export of that kind of data?
Well, some of that, some technical data is controlled, so it falls under the export controls. And that's one thing that we're doing. And there are other authorities too, for example, that the Department of Justice has to limit the export of sensitive personal data. So there's a variety of legal tools, both inside and outside BIS, that we can use.
All right, thank you. My time's expired, and I yield back.
Representative Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of my colleague from Massachusetts, I'd like to ask unanimous consent if I could enter 2 articles into the record. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Secretary Kessler. I have the privilege of serving on the Intelligence Committee as well. And one thing that we think about, let's use Mythos as an example. I think Anthropic did the responsible thing as a company when they realized some of the powerful tools that were becoming available, coming to the government, working with folks to make sure there was responsible application of these tools. Within BIS and within Congress, one thing that we think about with the frontier labs that are out there, with how rapidly these technologies are emerging, do you have the tools, or do we have the authorities in place that compel these companies to come to us as the federal government to say, hey, here's a tool that we may not want our adversaries to get a hold of. We may not actually want our own public to get a hold of yet. We don't fully understand. Does that make sense? You get what I'm thinking about. And this is a place where I think the administration, not in a partisan way, but in a national security way, in a way of protecting the public, because we see how fast these technologies are evolving.
Right. Well, thank you for the question. I think that we showed the world that we do have the tools in the case of Anthropic. Right. We had national security concerns, and we responded quickly to address them and to control the dissemination of the model. And we worked with Anthropic to address our concerns, and Anthropic responded admirably. And we, and after too much time had passed, we lifted the controls and ensure that they continue to work with us as they develop guardrails and make sure that their model's secure.
And again, I applaud Anthropic for doing the responsible thing and the right thing and working together with us. What I worry about, though, will that next frontier lab, will that next company that comes across a very powerful model or powerful tool do the right thing? I hope they do. But what are the tools and things that we should be thinking about as the federal government to create a compelling narrative that says, hey, wait a minute, you have to work with us here on this?
Absolutely. Well, so I think, as the executive branch, we work closely with all the frontier labs, all the American frontier labs, and encourage them to cooperate with us closely as they develop and prepare to release these frontier models. We work with them to assess the security risks. And again, that's done through parts of the government like CASE, which I mentioned, through the White House. And they know now that if If there's a company that isn't following the rules, isn't following the pathway that's set out in the executive order from June, that we have tools at our disposal to limit the dissemination of the models.
I mean, I guess one thing that I would encourage the administration to work with Congress, because I do think it would be important for us to put those guidelines in place to put kind of the code of conduct. Again, I do worry about how quickly things are evolving. I do worry about whether these models get in our adversaries' hands. Again, coming from California, you see a lot of the innovations that the Frontier Labs are doing. And I don't want to just hope that each lab will do the right thing. I want to have a compelling case that says, hey, here's the guidelines, here's the things that would compel you to come to the administration and compel you to come to Congress to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with you, and I agree with the concern that you're expressing. This is obviously a rapidly evolving landscape. It's a new world. And we've used and we're developing new tools to encourage cooperation with the government. And we're also, developing the framework for Frontier Labs to cooperate with the government and to make sure that our concerns are addressed. So,
and again, I guess I would argue, and I think for this committee as well as for Congress, that we ought to work with industry. Again, I suspect most people want to do the right thing. We ought to work with the administration. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be an issue of how do we protect our intellectual property, our advantages, but also our national security and safety. So again, I would look forward to working with your office as well as others to try to create those guardrails and industry.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Representative Issa.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Kessler, I appreciate that you've been very available for conversation and correspondence. So I hope you'll take my opening here as positive. First of all, would it surprise you to know that during the 4 years of the Biden administration, applied materials grew by 6%, Lam research shrunk by 18%, well, the Chinese makers, including NAURA, grew by 93%, and AMEC grew by 254%. Are those figures that you'd find credible and not surprising?
I find them credible.
Would you find it credible that it hasn't really reversed by very much, that those Chinese institutions continue to grow by double and triple digits, while American companies find themselves still behind the power curve on regaining their volume and dollar leadership?
Right, I find that credible as well.
So as we look at this, and by the way, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put in for the record, with the unanimous consent, an article from Bloomberg, secretive Chinese chip maker is built to dodge U.S. curbs.
Without objection.
Thank you. Your title is an amazing one. First of all, you're part of the Department of Commerce, meaning that your job is to promote commerce. Business industry and security is an interesting two-part obligation, isn't it? Both to promote our industry and protect it, and then the security side of it, in your case, primarily on exports, right?
That's correct.
And more broadly, commerce is dealing with both exports and imports from a standpoint of protecting industry.
Correct.
So for the record here, is one of the challenges that you face that we have to support through our funding and authorization, the balance between our industry, which is a global industry when we look at chip production, chip makers, and the products that allow for those making, they cannot be global leaders if they are cut off from substantially half or more of the market. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's important for the United States and for the Department of Commerce to support and protect the industry that makes the tools that make the semiconductor industry.
I appreciate that, and that's why I brought up those companies. If we take, for example, Qualcomm in my home district, Qualcomm lost in the 5G race. China won. It wasn't because they didn't work hard. It was because China owned the market for the utilization. If they had a chip that worked, they got first dibs on it. That balance is one that we failed in. In other words, today, many of our chip makers find themselves with only one market to sell through to the global market, and that's China, meaning that their chips have to pass from here through China to get to Europe and the other countries because the products are substantially assembled in China. That's a fair statement, isn't it?
Look, you use the word balance, and I agree with you that it's important to find the right balance, right? We want to make export markets accessible for our companies, and we also want to make sure that we respect national security. And in this case, we're talking about a set of technologies, as you know, we're talking about a set of technologies that are very sensitive from a national security perspective.
Well, here's my conundrum, and it's one you and I have spoken about before, but I wanted to make sure we put it in the record. You have an average of 66 days or so for approvals, and that sounds pretty laudable, about 2 months between application and approval. However, the companies that we've been talking about, the chip manufacturers, the manufacturers for the chips, the NVIDIA-type companies and beyond, they don't find 66 days. In some cases, they are undesignated, and they are part of the I don't have an answer ever. So how do we go from a good average, which includes, somebody making gun parts, all the possible controlled items, and get down to the global leadership areas, quite frankly, the 1, 2, 3, and 4, and $5 trillion companies in which America dominates, however China assembles? How do we get it to where it's 66 days for those companies? Because I'm concerned that one thing we know is they're not getting the quick answers. In some cases, they're not getting the approvals at all or the denials.
Well, that's true. So in the vast majority of cases for licenses that we handle, decisions and approvals come quickly. As you said, it could be as little as 2 weeks. It could be a month or two. And again, that's the vast majority of cases that we handle. One of the changes that I've made, and one of the changes that I committed to make when I was going through my confirmation process, was to stop the rubber stamping of licenses that involve serious national security equities. As I mentioned before, under the prior administration, there were thousands of licenses granted to entity-listed companies, and I think that's not the outcome that the members of this committee expect to see. And so I have been, the BIS, under this administration, has been applying more scrutiny to those licenses where there are national security equities, and I think that that's the right outcome. So that's how the licensing process is working now. And again, I think that it's entirely appropriate that when there are serious national security equities, we would take a close look. We would involve technical experts within BIS. We would talk to the companies, make sure that we understand from the company's perspective what the reasons might be for granting an export license application. And so we're very thorough.
Thank you, and thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Representative Kumlager-Dove.
Secretary, Undersecretary Kessler, thank you for appearing today before this committee and for meeting with me 2 weeks ago. You are charged with leading one of our most important national security agencies at a critical moment in world history as AI technology transforms society, and that is why your job is so important. Restricting the sale of our most advanced AI chips to China is a national security priority. Would you agree that we must maintain our competitive advantage with AI over China?
Well, thank you. It was good to see you again, Congresswoman, and I appreciated the meeting with you too. And yes, I think it's essential that the United States maintain its lead in AI, in quantum, in semiconductor technology, and all the sensitive technologies that are going to define the economic competition of the 21st century.
Thank you so much. I too agree with you. So last week, you and Secretary Lutnick loosened export controls on the United Arab Emirates, making it easier to export advanced AI chips, military equipment, commercial satellites, and spacecraft. Specifically for this hearing, The rule allows the UAE government and designated companies, including Emirati AI leaders like G42 and Core42, to access advanced AI chips and servers without needing individual licenses. So the conflicts of interest between the president, his son, and any dealings with UAE are rampant. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump co-founded World Liberty Financial. In January 25, just before President Trump was inaugurated, a UAE royal, who is the UAE National Security Advisor, purchased a 49% stake in World Liberty Financial, reportedly netting Trump $263 million. In May of 2025, World Liberty Financial announced that its new stablecoin, USD1, would be used by Abu Dhabi investment firm MGX to finance a $2 billion investment in crypto exchange company Binance. And who is the chairman of MGX? That same UAE Royal National Security Advisor who bought 49% stake in World Liberty Financial. Now we have your announcement easing export controls on, you guessed it, the United Arab Emirates, who now stands to gain access to frontier AI chips. So I have to ask you, Secretary, have you or Secretary Lutnick had any discussions about the UAE and with World Liberty Financial or members of the Trump family?
Well, no, not for me. But what I can tell you is that this UAE decision that we made, I believe, is an appropriate revision to the export control country groups that recognizes the UAE's status as a key ally in the region.
Right. I have limited time. I want to appreciate that you said no, not from you. I am curious about Secretary Lutnick, and I'm curious to know if there have been any correspondence, any emails, any disappearing signal chats, any meetings that you have seen or you have heard. And the reason why I ask is because Secretary Rubio came here just not long ago, and when asked similar questions, he said, well, you, Congresswoman, just don't know where to look. So I want to ask, where should we be looking? Where should we be looking for this information? Because I have to tell you, it smells of conflict of interest. It smells like it could be an illegal pay-to-play scheme, and you are an accomplished lawyer. You went to Yale, you went to Stanford, you know about these things, and you, I believe, would know an illegal pay-to-play scheme when you see it. Well, and the reason why I ask these questions is because when you are written up, when this will be your legacy, this will be your legacy. And if I hope we do not hear or read about a scheme like we did, the mining deal scheme with Secretary Lutnick when it comes to the Emirates and these chips. And I hope that your name is nowhere on those correspondences or signal chats or meeting dossiers that come up.
I will be proud for the actions that we've taken, including with respect to the UAE, to be part of my legacy and what the administration does. I think that forging closer ties with the UAE, encouraging the UAE to invest in the U.S. tech stack, encouraging it to invest in U.S. AI data center build-out, strengthening the partnership between the United States and the UAE, I think that it is one of the most significant achievements of the administration.
Well, if there's a pay-to-play scheme, just know the Supreme Court protects the president. It doesn't protect you.
You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by asking for permission to enter into the record a letter that was sent to Secretary Lutnick, dated October 30, 2025.
Without objection.
And Mr. Kessler, in this letter, Chairman Mast, Chairman Molinar, Chairman Garbarino, Chairman Crawford, and myself identify high-risk tech sectors such as advanced medical equipment, industrial machinery and robotics, energy generation and storage, subsea cable systems, and semiconductor manufacturing equipment that need to be addressed using ICTS authorities to protect the U.S. market from technology threats. However, since then, there has been no further action beyond enforcing the Biden-era policies. It's my understanding that Secretary Lutnick is excited to use these authorities to protect critical U.S. sectors from CCP technologies. Has anyone instructed you not to use the ICTS authorities to protect U.S. technology sectors from the Chinese?
Look, the decision to use ICTS authorities in any particular case, it would be a decision that the administration makes.
I understand, but nobody has instructed you not to.
For any decision that we would make, we would consult with other parts of the administration. We make sure we move forward in a coordinated way. Right? We're a team, and there are sectors.
But now you're not answering what I thought was going to be a fairly simple question, that no one had instructed you to do that. So now it begs a bigger question as to who is then seemingly or potentially putting up a roadblock to the use of the ICTS.
I'm not saying that there's a roadblock, and we are using ICTS, as I mentioned in my testimony. We're using the authority aggressively in the context of passenger vehicles. And, you know, what I'm telling you is that we look at it like there's a set of sectors that have, where we're concerned about possible espionage risks, infiltration, data exfiltration.
I got it, and this has now taken up half of my time, which I thought was going to take a minute, because I'm not getting what I thought was going to be a simple answer. So you and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, about no rulemaking that has been attached to this, and why that might be the case. You indicated that you would be willing to work with me on that.
Of course.
Okay. This has to be addressed. We have not, I mean, from October, you got the chairman of Intel, chairman of Homeland Security, chairman of the China Select, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm just a little old subcommittee chairman who happens to have operational responsibility for this. It boggles the mind that this administration is not utilizing their relationships here on the Hill to be able to address these things. I have to hit two other things. BIS is supposed to close loopholes, not create new ones. I know you and I had some debate back and forth about whether this is a loophole or not about the black wells in China. Why did BIS issue guidance in May 31st saying that Chinese companies can keep any Blackwell chips that they had bought? And whether those were legally or illegally obtained, shouldn't you be clear with the Chinese that they can't keep any Blackwells that they may have gotten through either smuggling or other loopholes?
The guidance that we issued on May 31st clarified and reaffirmed a pre-existing policy that had been in place since November 2023. And that is that companies that send advanced AI chips to countries in Country Group D or companies that are headquartered there but located outside Country Group D5, that they need to get a license from BIS. And if they hadn't, it would be a violation. And what the guidance says is they should self-disclose.
And shouldn't there be a little bit more behind that? Okay, I got to move on because this is a multiple conversations that we have had. That is just a frickin' circle that you talk in. And I'm sorry, but this is unacceptable. So let's talk about CXMT, which I understand from your conversation with the chairman, you have a less clear view of their standing within China. We've already seen strict export controls on U.S. companies to sell technology to the memory maker, CXMT. Our allies don't. Key Dutch company, ASML, even has a friendship garden, whatever the hell that is, with CXMT. So it's hard to imagine anything more America last than letting our allies sell to our adversaries when we don't. So I want to know, what are you going to do about it, and what's the administration going to do about it?
Well, I agree with you that this is a major concern, and you're right that our companies aren't able to sell to CXMT, and we're concerned. I'm concerned about the article that you mentioned, and we raise it directly with our counterparts, including in the Netherlands. And I was in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago, raising these concerns. We continue to seek alignment. We continue to insist that the backfilling by foreign companies and foreign countries on export control stop, and we're not going to rest until we achieve that.
It doesn't seem that's the case. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Representative Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member. Effective export controls depend not only on strong laws, but also on a robust U.S. diplomatic and enforcement presence overseas. Today, that presence is under strain. Dozens of ambassadorial posts remain vacant, and many of our embassies and diplomatic missions are operating with reduced staffing, which limits our ability to engage foreign partners and enforce U.S. policies abroad. Export control officers are BIS's frontline enforcement officials overseas. They monitor compliance with U.S. export controls, investigate potential violations, and work with foreign governments to protect sensitive American technologies. In 2024, BIS approved licenses for over $500 billion in exports, yet BIS had only 11 or 12 export control officers stationed at U.S. diplomatic missions around the world. Mr. Kessler, how many export control officers do you currently have stationed in China?
In China, there are 3.
Okay.
But I agree with you on the importance of.
Well, hold on. I want to follow up with my limited time. What more needs to be done to bolster BIS's enforcement efforts and its ability to conduct in-use monitoring in China?
Yeah, let me just tell you that, when I came into office, there was only 1 in China. Now there are 3. We believe, and I think agree with you strongly, that we should be increasing the number of export control officers worldwide. And we have a plan in this fiscal year to bring it up to 25. And in the president's budget, if it's approved, we would be able to bring it up to 65. And that is getting closer to the level where I think we need to be.
The budget request calls for, on that note, for a large increase in export control officers. How many additional will be focused specifically on China first?
Well, we haven't assigned each of the 65 to countries, to specific countries.
But
what I can
with
tell you is
China, our
that
main adversary.
what I can tell you is that it's important to have not just export control officers in the country, but also in countries where we're concerned about diversion.
I get that, but
And
I only have 5 minutes. So, in China, how many will be focused on China?
Well, I don't have a number to give you right now. I haven't assigned the 65 to individual countries, but I can tell you that we're going to continue to focus on the risk of diversion to China and other country group D countries.
Well, what about Russia? How many will be assigned to Russia? Have you thought about that?
We typically focus the export control officers on countries where we're concerned about diversion, including to Russia. Okay. And so, for example, I believe that we have one in Finland.
I want to stay focused on the questions, just because I'm limited in time. So you don't have a number yet as far as Russia either, is that correct?
I don't have a number, but I'd be happy to follow up with any other information that I can give you.
Fair enough. Regarding Russia, it is known that Russia continues to rely on third country procurement networks to obtain controlled technologies. What additional authorities or international partners does BIS need to more effectively disrupt these networks?
Well, I think it's about enforcement resources. It's about making sure that we can track multiple national security challenges at once. And that's the reason that we've been pursuing the enforcement surge this year, and that we requested additional enforcement resources for this fiscal year and a massive increase for the next one. I think it's about making sure that BIS can become an enforcement powerhouse.
Okay. Last year, when the administration signed AI deals AI deals with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, it signed agreements with both of those governments to put security guardrails in place to protect U.S. technology and prevent access to U.S. technologies. Why were we placing those guardrails? Was it to prevent diversion to China?
Well, when we make deals with other countries to facilitate the export of advanced AI chips, we want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that's consistent with national security, right? We welcome other countries, including Gulf countries, investment in American technology. We welcome their decision to build their own tech infrastructure on the American AI stack. And we also are mindful of national security and want to make sure that we're clear about what our expectations are.
And last question. Now that we have lifted controls
Your
on...
time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Undersecretary Kessler, thank you for coming and testifying before us today. As you know, Chinese companies are not allowed to buy America's most advanced AI chips. So what do? They go straight to the source and hire companies like TSMC to manufacture the chips for them. And they hide these activities by creating shell or front companies. In 2024, TSMC manufactured AI chip was discovered inside Huawei's hardware by research firm Tech Insights. This was traced to a Huawei front company called SoftGo that received 3 million AI chips from TSMC. And following that revelation, BIS put in place the foundry due diligence rule to make sure chip makers like TSMC do not accidentally make more AI chips for Huawei. But there are now questions about whether overseas Chinese subsidiary companies in places like Malaysia and Singapore are exploiting a loophole. So, Undersecretary, pursuant to the foundry due diligence rule, are you currently enforcing a license requirement for a chip maker to be able to build AI chips for unapproved companies operating outside of arms embargoed countries?
Well, thank you for the question. What I can tell you is that if a foundry, like the one you mentioned, provides advanced AI chips to a front company for another company that's in country group D5, that would absolutely be a violation. That would be something that we could investigate and enforce against. And that's under the current rules. So I don't think that this is a loophole. I think it's quite clear.
Okay. We want to make sure that you are actually enforcing the current rules in place, and then of course, we don't want to make sure that we do not, allow China to be able to go behind our backs, and I need to make sure that BIS is enforcing it as strongly as possible.
Of course, this is a major priority for us.
Well, last June, you testified before our subcommittee on South and Central Asia that export control alignment with Japan and the Netherlands remains quote-unquote incomplete. But that's been 1 year since you said that. So Dutch and Japanese companies continue to sell chip-making tools or provide service and repair services to more advanced chip factories in China that U.S. companies are prohibited from selling to or working with. So can you provide any updates on BIS's progress on aligning our export controls on chip-making equipment, and have you set any specific deadlines?
Well, thank you for the question again. What I can tell you, and I need to respect the confidentiality of diplomatic discussions that I have. I can tell you that there is cooperation with foreign governments on export controls. But unfortunately, I have to report that the cooperation remains incomplete. There's still more work to do. And that's a conversation that I have constantly, particularly with allies. So there's more work to do.
Certainly. BIS has historically worked with the private sector through technical advisory committees, as well as internal compliance departments. So Undersecretary, you have previously discussed the importance of a dialogue with industry, given the speed and the scale of the technologies that is under your jurisdiction. So can you talk about the collaboration between BIS and the private sector, and how the industry assists BIS on issues of compliance or enforcement?
Absolutely. Well, we work very closely with industry on a day-to-day basis at all levels in BIS, whether that's answering their questions, helping them understand the rules, or getting input on the rules that we should have and fixes to the rules that we should make. So, both in formal channels and informal channels, we're constantly consulting with industry.
Okay, thank you. My time's up.
Representative Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for appearing before the committee today. I want to ask you kind of a threshold question that will be the basis of my other questions, but I know the focus has been on China this morning, but I also believe that both China and Russia pose a adversarial threat to our country and to our allies. Would you agree?
Well, Russia poses national security risks. That is true.
Okay. And just for your, you may know this, but I'm one of those members that really disagreed with the president on the handling of the issue of Nvidia and the selling of its powerful H-200 chips to China. I think that is in an area where a direction we don't want to go. But let me focus on, with regards to BIS's budget, the efforts with Russia. Since they launched their illegal invasion in Ukraine in 2022, the United States and G7 countries began using various tools of statecraft to restrict Russia's finance and military capacity with various degrees of success, one would argue. A key one, I think, being export controls have been very difficult. As you know, these tools are central to exerting maximum pressure on Putin in order to bring an end to this war, as we all want to see happen, and certainly the president has tried. But at the negotiating table, it seems that in the first 3 years following Russia's invasion, the U.S. has imposed a range of new sanctions, export controls over Russia, with the Biden administration over 700 Russian entities to the entity list. But under the Trump administration, the U.S. export controls on Russia seem to have fallen off a cliff. In 2025, it seems the U.S. did not have any Russian entities to the entity list, but even more importantly, I think, comes to enforcement, obviously, both with us and with the G7 countries. In Senator Graham's memory, in reference to the sanction bill that he was his bill and the proponent, how do you explain this drop-off in the U.S. export controls on Russia? And why does it seem, in my view, that the administration's taken the foot off the gas when it comes to exerting pressure? The president likes to leverage and takes great pride in that. We've got great leverage opportunities here. Why?
Well, I don't see the same drop-off that you do, sir. We continue to maintain the export controls that apply to Russia, and we continue to enforce them. And I think the most important step that we can take is to strengthen enforcement across the board.
Well, I agree, and you answered, I guess, while I was out in another hearing, my colleague's question about adding more experts within BIS in the area of enforcement and as it relates to Russia. Did I hear that correctly? It's that intention to do so?
Well, we want to add experts within BIS across the board.
Well, we need to. I think we need to strengthen our export controls, and how you're going to use this proposed additional funding, I think many of us are concerned with, not only on Russia, but China as well. They pose a threat. I mean, both President Zelensky indicated here within the last month they are retrieving missile that had been sent to Ukraine and crashed, that those components within those Russian missiles had parts, chips, and circuit boards that were manufactured either in the U.S. or in Europe. I mean, that means they're getting around the enforcement, right?
Anytime we hear reports like that, we look into them, and that obviously raises a question about enforcement and adherence to our rules.
Well, enforcement, effective enforcement is what we want.
Absolutely.
And it seems that the Russians are very cagey and capable. I think from hard experience in the last several years, in circumventing these sanctions.
Well, we're fully committed to cracking down on all enforcement, all circumvention, all diversion that we know of.
Well, it seems to me that it's important that you report to the committee to the degree of additional funds, and I am one of those that thinks it ought to be, you ought to have more resources, frankly, in terms of our efforts to enforce effectively the sanctions both posed toward Russia and China. Mm-hmm. Do you agree?
I appreciate that, yes, and you know,
Willing to
we're happy
report
work
back
with
to
you on
this
that.
committee with the jurisdiction on what progress we can mark here before the end of the year?
I'm happy to work with that. I'm happy to work with you on that, absolutely.
All right. The balance of my time is expired. More to be continued. Thank you.
And best wishes, Congressman Costa. I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I agreed with everything you said. I now recognize myself, and indeed, Undersecretary Kessler, I'm grateful for your service, but I'm also extraordinarily appreciative of your South Carolina family heritage, and you're always welcome back to visit with the family.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Please come back. With the visionary leadership of President Donald Trump and Ambassador Tom Barrack, Syria is emerging as a partner of the United States after 54 years of Ba'athist socialist dictatorship, 68 years of alliance with the Soviet Union. Last Wednesday, Senator Lindsey Graham met with Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara in Ankara as both attended the NATO summit. It is so meaningful that Senator Graham changed his position of concern about Syria to support Syria in line with President Donald Trump, give Syria a chance. I am grateful for the issuance of the export license of Nokia for the Syrian parliament. This ensures America is a partner by choice, not adversaries. With the upcoming lifting of the state's sponsor of terrorism designation, which I hope you expedite, how do you plan to further ease export controls such as possible for U.S. companies to invest and export to Syria to keep Syria thriving and support the sovereignty of Syria for the benefit of all of the Middle East? There's the possibility of a stability, peace, and prosperity that President Trump, I think, is correct, identifying for the first time in 3,000 years. And with that in mind, what can we do?
Well, thank you, sir, for the question. You know, I've been proud to support the fresh start that the Syrian people are making and to facilitate increased trade and investment with Syria through the export controls. As I know you know, we issued a regulation last year which eased export controls on Syria, and that's made a big difference, including in the case that you mentioned. You know, right now, as you mentioned, there was a notification to Congress about the SST designation of Syria, and you know, we are going to talk to our interagency partners, to the State Department, and make sure that we keep the export controls in tune with other changes that are happening to the law, so that we can continue to encourage trade and investment.
And again, what an extraordinary opportunity we have after decades of socialist rule to have a potential for a free and dynamic and stable and peaceful and prosperous Syria. So I wish you well on that.
Thank you.
And I want to join with Secretary Congressman Costa. There's evidence, disturbing evidence, that American components used in Russian weapons of mass destruction. I have sent several letters to the affected secretaries urging additional measures to be deployed to prevent sensitive technologies from reaching enemies of freedom to kill Ukrainian families. Adversaries should never benefit from American ingenuity. So grateful, as we're pending right now, for the Russian sanctions bill to be addressed as the Lindsey Graham sanctions bill, as he was a champion for Ukrainian victory. What is being done to close loopholes and prevent American companies from exporting radar components and other sensitive technologies to war criminal Putin?
Look, I think in my mind, this is about strong enforcement, right? We need to make sure that whenever there's a violation happening, whenever we detect possible violations, whether it's through evidence from the battlefield or evidence from our companies, that we act swiftly to address it. And that's why we've requested the additional resources that we have in the budget to continue to surge enforcement.
And again, thank you very much for your service. And again, I'm so thrilled to find out your South Carolina heritage. It's certainly meaningful to me and my constituents. With that in mind, we now go to my friend from California, Congresswoman Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, from Washington. But Mr. Undersecretary, it's good to have you here today. Thank you. Your agency plays an important role in American AI policy. Both foreign and domestic AI companies are actually built on a mass surveillance regime that prioritizes winning the so-called arms race by putting private Americans' information at risk. Through export controls and other mechanisms, your agency is in a unique position, I think, to ensure that AI systems are safe, effective, and equitable. Last month, shortly after Anthropic released its new Fable 5 and Mythos 5 models, your agency sent the company a cursory letter that a license would be required for any foreign person to access their models. In response, the company shut down access to these models for all users. After 2.5 weeks of negotiations between the Trump administration and the company, your agency partially reversed the restriction. Did you participate in any of those discussions with Anthropic?
Well, this was an action that was taken under the export control authorities. So yes, I was involved in the actions that we took.
And is it true that the reason your agency issued the letter was because Amazon CEO Andy Jassy raised concerns to White House officials about the ability to bypass the AI model's guardrails?
Whenever we see a risk to national security, whether it's from a frontier model or something else, we want to act swiftly to address it. And that's what we did in this case.
But were you responding to concerns that Amazon CEO raised to you? Is that where the concern came from?
The concern, look, we have a whole of government apparatus that evaluates frontier models. It wasn't just, it wasn't like based on a phone call, it was based on our evaluation of the risks of the dissemination of the model and our concerns about what we didn't know. And that's why, we issued the controls. We worked with the company. They cooperated over the course of a few weeks admirably with the administration. And when we were able to resolve our concerns and ensure that they would continue to work with us and continue to help us understand the vulnerabilities in the models, then we lifted the controls.
Thank you. I ask because there's a Politico article that suggests differently. It says that Amazon, quote, raised concerns to the White House and, quote, was responding to an administration request for feedback. And so I guess what I want to know is, did your bureau make an independent analysis of the security risks? You can just say yes or no.
Well, the assessment of the risks is not housed in BIS in the first instance, I would say. I mentioned Casey before when we were talking about this topic.
I guess I'm just asking you what independent analysis you made separate from a phone call from the CEO of a major company that was concerned about competition. I'm wondering if you actually went through an analysis of your own and whether the other 3 agencies with jurisdiction on export controls, that's State, Defense, and Energy, did they sign off on the restrictions?
Well, the U.S. government makes its own independent assessments of the risks of frontier models, absolutely.
So you did your own independent analysis to come up?
The government does, yes.
And
yes.
The other 3 agencies with jurisdiction on export controls, they all signed off on the restrictions?
Well, when we issue as informed letters, we don't necessarily go through the same kind of interagency process that we would do when we have a license. But I think it's important to know that the government is conducting its own independent assessment of frontier models.
Well, that is very important because I do think that at the end of the day, these issues are too complex and important to be decided on political favoritism or the advice of a big tech CEO, even though he's my constituent. Amazon is located right in my district. I want to make sure that we have vigorous export controls and a well-established interagency process. And so in the future, can you commit to issuing rules in the Federal Register with clear guidelines that would apply to all AI companies and models rather than issuing letters to companies on an ad hoc basis?
Look, I think it depends on the circumstances, but the executive order that the president issued on AI in June is a step towards establishing an
But it's
industry-
not this. I mean, the restrictions that you put in place were just for this one company. Are you going to establish clear rules and guidelines, publish them in the register so everyone understands what they are, so that there's not a perception that you're giving favoritism to one company over another?
I expect that the government will develop more rules on the release of frontier AI models. So I think that's going to happen.
So that's a
Ladies'
yes, you'll
time has
commit to that.
expired. I will now recognize
Thank
the
you.
member from New Jersey, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary Kessler, for being here today. America is in an AI arms race with China. As we compete for the latest memory chips, computing chips, and language learning models, America needs to fund and to support robust export controls that place America at the front of the AI arms race. Undersecretary Kessler, whistleblowers have long been a cornerstone of America's intelligence gathering operations. However, the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, does not currently have a whistleblower reward program. Do you agree that a whistleblower program would strengthen intelligence gathering and enforcement efforts at BIS?
I think that sounds like a constructive idea. I can tell you that whistleblowers right now play an important role in our enforcement efforts. We have cases that we generate based on credible leads from whistleblowers. I think that facilitating more of that type of activity and disclosure to commerce is constructive.
The Stop Stealing Our Chips Act, which I co-led with Representative Johnson of Texas, creates a whistleblower incentive program at the BIS. This bill recently passed the House Foreign Affairs Committee with overwhelming bipartisan support and passed out of the Senate with unanimous consent. I look forward to seeing this bill considered on the House floor in the very near future. I also appreciate your leadership in strengthening America's pharmaceutical supply chain and advancing domestic manufacturing. My district is home to numerous rare disease drug developers who are typically small biotechs with only a few FDA-approved products. Their patients are often children who have few to no treatment options. So I was encouraged that the administration's Section 232 Pharmaceutical Tariff Proclamation, the President recognized that the supply chain of rare disease therapies would receive a 0% tariff rate. Could you provide an update on when the Department of Commerce expects to publish the Federal Register notice clarifying the implementation of the Section 3D 0% tariff treatment for pharmaceutical products?
Yes, I expect that in the next, I would say, month or two, certainly before September.
Thank you. And will you commit to working with me and the Congress to ensure that the implementation of the pharmaceutical tariffs reflect the unique consideration of rare disease supply chains in order to protect rare disease patients from unintended consequences?
Of course, I'd be happy to work with you on that, work with other members of Congress on that.
Thank you. And then on the third question is, the BIS's export control enforcement work is critical to winning the AI arms race with China. And I'm glad to see this reflected in your robust funding request for the fiscal year 2027. Can you discuss how BIS would leverage the increased funding requested to prevent diversion of AI chips from their intended destination?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think it's more of what we're doing. We already devote considerable resources as a proportion of our budget. We devote considerable resources to stopping smuggling schemes involving AI chips, diversion schemes. And that's what led, for example, to the case that involves Supermicro, which I mentioned in my opening statement. I think we just need more of it. We know that there's more happening. We have active cases, but we're concerned that there are cases that we either haven't detected or that we just don't have the resources to chase down. So again, I think it's just about increasing the resources dedicated to enforcement and encouraging the enforcement unit of BIS to do more of what they're doing.
Thank you. I yield back.
Now I recognize the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Ammo.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Mr. Kessler. As you know, your job is to help American businesses take their world-class products to international markets while protecting our most vital trade secrets. But under your leadership at Commerce, the Bureau of Industry and Security has become less effective and less efficient. You stopped providing the rules of the road for companies operating in China or Russia. You haven't added a single bad actor to the list of prohibited entities companies can't sell to since October. But all the world's bad actors didn't just disappear last October. The problems are still there, and frankly, you're just ignoring them. Not only are you making Americans less safe by letting the bad guys run rampant through the world's markets, you're actually making it harder for Americans to do business. Delays at BIS have doubled the average processing time for export licensing, causing American businesses to lose contracts and undermining our leadership in technology worldwide. Right now, BIS has limited engagement with American businesses as they struggle to comply with our increasingly complex export controls. In the past, the BIS provided real support to American businesses, including training seminars and advisory opinions. Businesses knew they could count on BIS. Empowering bad actors while undercutting U.S. companies is the exact opposite of your job. But frankly, that's what you're doing. So, Mr. Kessler, do you want businesses to comply with our export controls?
Well, sir, I disagree with much of what's in your question.
But yes or no?
And I want to clarify a couple of things.
Okay.
One is, I think you said that the processing time has doubled?
Yes.
That's incorrect. The processing time, the average processing time for licenses was 62 days in 2025 versus 60 days in 2024. So it's approximately the same. As far as the entity list goes, what I think is important is enforcing the list. We have a robust list, but it's important to enforce it. And
but so you don't believe that anybody? No,
licenses.
excuse me, Mr. Kessler. So you don't believe there have been grounds to add anyone since October?
We have added 140 entities to the entity list, and we will continue to add entities to the entity list when we as an administration think that it's appropriate to do so. But I think it's important to enforce the list. Under the Biden administration, thousands of licenses were granted to entities on the entity list. There was rubber stamping happening for exports to entity-listed companies.
And do you think
that's
that
something that is
Mr.
stopped
Kessler,
under
Mr.
this
Kessler,
administration? And I think
but let's go back to my original question. I wanted you to have some time, but my question here is, do you want businesses to comply with our export controls?
Absolutely.
Then why aren't you helping them when they're begging for assistance? BIS traditionally hosted an annual update conference each March, but that was canceled, and the last conference was in 2025. So why haven't you hosted the annual conference?
We keep track of the number of times that we assist companies that approach us.
I asked about the conference.
In 2025,
Mr. Kessler, I'm asking, Mr. Kessler, excuse me. Mr. Kessler, I'm speaking. So, and I asked you a question. Why haven't you hosted the annual conference?
What I'm trying to explain is that we help companies routinely on a daily basis, many times a day, such that in 2025, we did it 35,000 times. And that was more than the prior year. It was an increase over the prior year. We will continue to host an update conference.
Okay, so that's answering my question. So you plan to host a conference this year?
Likely this year.
Good. Okay, because the challenge here is when you reduce BIS's ability to work with American businesses, that's dangerous. It reduces compliance with our export controls, increases the chances that our sensitive technology ends up in adversaries' hands. There are consequences. So just flippantly saying we do it in a lot of ways, but we're going to cut off in an essential way is not satisfactory to me. You know, this is why I introduced the Strengthening Export Controls Compliance Act to require BIS to re-engage with industry. The bill passed this committee earlier this year with overwhelming bipartisan support. So my colleagues share my sentiments. This bill improves compliance with our export controls, strengthens national security, allows BIS to focus on its enforcement resources on bad actors rather than honest mistakes. So that's a win-win. So here's the top line. I'm hoping that you make the changes needed to restart engagement. To do it, with the thoroughness that's required to increase compliance and to protect national security. The stakes are high. And so it isn't just, an informal process. Use the tools that you have at your hand to do something that's important to the safety and security of this nation. With that, I yield back.
Representative Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Undersecretary Kessler, thank you for your testimony here today. In response to that last round of questioning, you're being accused of running a less efficient export control system. What is a more efficient export control system? More entities being added to the list, but constant licensing? Or a thoughtful process of adding entities with the proper issuance of licenses without automatic issuance of licenses? What is the more efficient system?
Well, I think the latter.
Yeah, I do too. And I appreciate the administration and your focus on enforcement. Because if you really want to get tough on adversaries and make sure we don't have the technology transfer that we're concerned about, the enforcement piece is really the difference that this administration is making from the prior administration. So for years, we've seen only 11 export control officers stationed worldwide. And these are the officials whose job it is to make sure that the products that we sell worldwide actually go to where they're supposed to go and don't go to where they're not supposed to go. We had only one single officer in Southeast Asia, a hotbed of smuggling. But now, as you testified earlier, the BIS is in the middle of a hiring surge of new export control officers. So elaborate on BIS's plan for deploying these new export control officers. Where will they be stationed? One of my colleagues was concerned that there were not enough in China. Tell us a little bit about your plans with respect to hiring more export control officers.
Sure. So under the current budget, we expect to have 25 in place by the end of the fiscal year. Right now, we have 3 in China. We're going to have multiple. We already have some in Southeast Asia. We're going to increase that in Southeast Asia. We expect to increase it in the Middle East. We're increasing our presence in Central Asia. We want to have a presence across the world, anywhere that we have significant American technology flowing.
Well, this criticism from the other side of the aisle seems pretty misplaced when you're adding enforcement, not reducing enforcement, and you're focusing on the areas where we see most of the problem. I think the criticism needs to be directed to the past, not to the present. Let's talk about AI chip smuggling. Undersecretary, we've banned advanced AI chip sales for China, but Beijing is desperately working to smuggle these products anyway through illegal networks. Epoch AI estimates that between 290,000 and 1.6 million H100 equivalent chips were smuggled into China through the end of 2025. That could represent about a third of China's total AI chips. How does BIS's new enforcement posture and enforcement surge of enforcement take into account the scale and seriousness of this issue?
Well, again, we have surged our enforcement efforts. That's why there was an 18-fold increase in penalties imposed from 2024 to 2025. And it's already showing results. There was a Financial Times article recently that said that the price, there is a black market for chips in China, and because of BIS's enforcement activities, the price of smuggled chips had doubled. And that's an indication that our enforcement activity is working to address the concerns that you're raising.
As you and I have discussed, legislation that I've been working on for years, the new screening for outbound investment was made part of the NDAA. It is now law, the COINS Act, as it's called. That law was rooted in a recommendation from the U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission for many, many years. So we now have this new interagency tool to screen outbound investment. And one of the requirements that it imposes on Commerce is, as well as Treasury and the Department of War, is an alignment of these lists. So you manage the entity list. There's the 1260H list at the Pentagon. There's the CMIC list at Treasury. And the idea is that we shouldn't allow U.S. investment into a foreign entity that helps facilitate the development of technology when BIS is using export controls to to restrict the transfer of that technology. Have you begun with the Pentagon, with Treasury, to start to align the entity list with some of these other lists so that the export control system that we have works in tandem with restrictions on outbound investment?
These are discussions that we have all the time with the other agencies about the different lists. So yes, discussions are going on.
Well, just as a friendly reminder, Commerce under this new law is required now to work with Treasury, especially in making sure that there's coherence in our outbound investment screening and our export control regime, so that we are working in coordination with one another. And I urge you and the other relevant agencies to collaborate and inform Congress according to the new law. Finally, on onshoring manufacturing, we appreciate your work, Undersecretary, in advancing the President's America First trade policy to protect American businesses from Chinese trade actions and to support onshore manufacturing. I've heard from a number of companies that are looking to move their manufacturing facilities from outside of the United States into Kentucky in direct response to the President's agenda. As part of your role at BIS, you oversee Section 232 investigations. How is your department helping these companies expedite their attempts to move to America these supply chains?
Well, it varies from program to program, but Section 232 is all about strengthening these critical industries, these critical supply chains. There are different tools that we have available to us for different industries. But, for example, in the pharmaceutical sector, we have a program to incentivize companies that make new investments in U.S. pharmaceutical manufacturing and onshoring their manufacturing capabilities. So it varies from sector to sector, but I can tell you that if there's any companies that you or other members know of that would like assistance in onshoring, we're there to help.
Well, we've talked about wood products and the dumping problem there, but thank you for your service. I appreciate your answers, and I yield back.
Representative Castro.
Undersecretary Kessler, I want to start with something that I hope that we can agree on. The most capable AI models being trained today, they require large concentrations of advanced computing chips. Is that something that you agree with?
Yes.
And would you agree that the Chinese military and entities affiliated with the Chinese military should not have access to these chips to train their own AI models?
Well, I think it's important for American technology to be used for American companies in training our models.
Right, and not Chinese models and companies that are affiliated with their own military?
Right, they should be strengthening America.
Sure. Well, so I guess my question is, on June 8th, the U.S. Department of Defense listed Alibaba, a Chinese company, as having ties with the People's Liberation Army. In May, it was reported that the Commerce Department authorized 10 Chinese companies, including Alibaba, to purchase NVIDIA's H200, a highly capable AI chip, as you know. And my question is, has the Department of Commerce authorized any transactions with Alibaba since the Trump administration took office?
All the information about H200s is before the committee. It's confidential. I can't discuss it here, but the committee has information about the licenses that we've received.
No, I understand that in this forum that you can't comment on specific licenses. But would you agree that as a major Chinese company developing advanced AI models while being affiliated with the Chinese military, that American companies should not sell any advanced chips to Alibaba? And if any licenses were granted, will you revisit those decisions?
Well, what I think is that it's important, the approach that we've taken is to limit the quantity of chips to any particular company, H200s. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that we're talking about a chip that is several generations behind the leading edge, a chip that American companies aren't buying right now, and that we have an elaborate set of national security requirements that have to be fulfilled in order for us to consider the license on a case-by-case basis rather than under a presumption of denial. We issued this regulation in January, which sets out all those conditions. And so I believe that the requirements that any company has to meet to get a license, including all the requirements in the January regulation, including the quantity requirements, those are robust, and those should give us comfort about any exports of these chips. Now, I also want to make clear that there have been minimal exports of any H200s to China so far.
Well, and I guess, no, and I appreciate the answer. And I'm trying to fully understand kind of the contours of your decision-making because you made the comment that certain chips are older generation chips than others. So I guess, are you willing to sell older generation chips to a company affiliated with the Chinese military as long as it's not the latest technology, or kind of what's the contours of that decision-making?
Well,
Without getting into a specific license or
yeah,
company.
There are different degrees of sensitivity, right? And that's how our export control regime is set up. There are levels, there are classifications for older technology, for technology that is kind of irrelevant now.
But just to nail down just an answer to the question, is the Trump administration willing to sell some of these advanced chips to companies affiliated with the Chinese military if the conditions are right?
Well, we screen the parties carefully that are the subject of license applications that we receive. So, for example, if a company is on the entity list, we're not going to approve a license for chips to that company. So we would apply a very careful analysis to any license that we get.
No, thank you for that. I have one more.
We have rejected licenses.
I appreciate it. No, I have one more subject that I got to get to in my question. Yeah, Undersecretary Kessler, transnational criminal organizations continue to fuel instability across Latin America and the Caribbean, as you know, and one of the principal drivers of their power is their access to firearms, of which the vast majority are trafficked from the United States. I'm glad that the State Department has acknowledged this issue and is using foreign assistance to help countries track where these firearms are coming from. Do you agree that these cartels, which the administration has designated as foreign terrorist organizations, should not get any weapons from the United States?
So absolutely, we should be restricting the access of cartels to weapons.
Well, then I guess that's why I'm confused, because in September 2025, you rescinded the April 30th, 2024 BIS regulations that added safeguards for the export of firearms and stopped notifying the Congress about exports of these weapons. And the Trump administration State Department, if the Trump administration State Department and Secretary Rubio are trying to help Mexico and countries like Haiti track and stop these firearms from getting into the hands of designated foreign terrorist organizations, then why did you, as the head of BIS, make it easier for these cartels to get weapons by removing the safeguards instituted at BIS?
Well, that regulation went far beyond what you're describing. That regulation established a presumption of denial for 36 high-risk countries. It was extremely burdensome. It unnecessarily cut off American firearms exporters from, I believe hundreds of millions of dollars a year in business.
Well, this is our principal way. I know I'm over time.
Time has expired.
Yep, I'll get back with you on it. Thank you.
Representative Self is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Undersecretary, I've been looking at your presentation here and your PowerPoint. There's a lot of positions here. I want to ask you a question. I want to look at, should we be looking at inputs or outputs? A lot of the committees that I'm on, we look at inputs. What are we going to do to add to the department? What are we going to do to encourage growth? But I want to look at outputs here because we were told, not by you, probably a year ago, I don't remember the man's name, that China could not smuggle enough AI chips to overtake the U.S. It was almost a flat statement. And I'm not sure they have to. Because my question to you is, should we be looking at policy or enforcement? Because your presentation is enforcement heavy. Let's just be honest.
Absolutely.
It is enforcement heavy. I could go through your charts, but I won't. But the information that we were given that there are no new export controls on equipment. The license to buy H-200 but not Blackwells is there. There are no new entity list additions for almost a year now. There are no new location verification controls put in place. So my question is, do we really need to look at enforcement? Or do we need to look at the policies that we have in place? And I understand you have a dearth of employees, but if you'll just take the overall view there of why should we not be looking at some of these policies that seem to be lacking, as opposed to only looking at enforcement. Inputs. I want to talk about outputs.
Well, I agree with you that outputs are important and outcomes are important, and we should be focusing on the outcome of enforcement and how much are we enforcing. And as I mentioned, we increased enforcement 18-fold from 2024 to 2025, and I think that's significant. Under the prior administration, unfortunately, there was significant under-enforcement and under-deterrence of violations of the laws. Now, we should look at policy too, and Congress should look at policy too. We should look at that together and find areas where we think the policies need to be changed. But I don't think that more regulation equates to more national security. And so, you know, what I see as the highest priority for BIS and the biggest hole to fill is in enforcement. BIS ought to be an enforcement powerhouse. We ought to be, for example, having licensing processes that are rigorous, that appropriately handle applications that involve items of national security concern, not rubber stamping.
Let's look at some policy that you might take a look at. The AI Action Plan. So I think you've got the requirement for the policy, the negotiated policies in place, they just haven't been enacted. So I go back to my point. So I'll leave you with this. Mm-hmm. What three metrics, if we do this investment, and I think you used the term, I've forgotten the exact term, but generational investment or something like that. What are the three metrics that a year from now, Congress could say, you either met the metrics or you didn't?
I think that penalty amounts is the single most important metric, right? I see a huge
penalty
increase.
Amounts? Dollar amounts?
Penalty amounts, because we know that there's, and I'll tell you why, because we know that there are significant violations out there that are happening. We know that we've made a lot of progress from 2024 to 2025, and we're seeing so far in 2026 continued progress in increasing the penalty amounts. We want to know, is BIS catching the bad guys? Are the violations getting stopped, and are we effectively deterring the wrongdoing that we know is happening?
So you're not particularly fussed about the AI Action Plan not getting implemented?
Well, of course we want to implement the AI Action Plan. There are several parts to the action plan. You know, part of it is export promotion. Part of it is you know, semiconductor manufacturing equipment controls, which we're enforcing strongly. So absolutely, we want to implement that plan.
I think I'm going to submit the three metrics question to you in writing and just ask you to take a look at that. What do we look at in a year from now for outputs of this investment, should we make it? Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Representative Stanton is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary Kessler, for being here today for this important hearing. It is very concerning that since you took over the Bureau of Information Security, BIS, in March of last year, BIS has published the fewest rules of any year in more than 2 decades. The administration has also not added any new entity to the government's blacklist since October, the longest period of inaction since 2008. And export license applications have piled up for so long that American companies have lost business waiting for approvals. As rules stall, licenses pile up, and the foreign companies that could pose national security risks duck commerce blacklists. Sensitive technology has more room to flow to China and other adversaries. And in the absence of action from BIS, Congress has stepped in, advancing bills aimed at tightening U.S. AI chip export controls and closing perceived loopholes. One of those bills is the Match Act. The Match Act would impose extensive new controls on U.S. semiconductor tools and compel allies to do the same by controlling their tools extraterritorially or by restricting the sale of U.S. components to their companies. I'm concerned that if passed, the Match Act will have severe consequences for allied equipment suppliers, chip manufacturers like TSMC in Arizona, and Intel, also in Arizona, rely on. Undersecretary Kessler, from your perspective, is the Match Act the right approach? As written, do you agree that the Match Act would hurt our domestic semiconductor ecosystem?
Well, there's a policy motivation for the Match Act, which I appreciate, which is that we need greater alignment between the U.S. export control system and foreign export control systems. because we don't want foreign countries to backfill. The administration is going to, first of all, we're willing to work with Congress on any legislation in this area. And again, I appreciate the motivation behind it. We want to make sure that any legislation that's passed gives the administration new tools and doesn't constrain its authority.
Thank you. Your perspective is very helpful as this legislation advances in the House and Senate. The introduction of the Match Act highlighted the importance of achieving export control alignment with our allies. However, reporting indicates that your office has significantly curtailed staff-level engagement with our foreign government counterparts. This is in addition to pulling back from participating in traditional export control dialogues like the Wassenaar arrangement with allies. This is a confounding decision given the importance of achieving export control alignment to stay ahead of China in the AI race. Mr. Undersecretary, do you agree that export controls are generally the most effective when they are implemented multilaterally and in close coordination with our allies and partners?
I do agree that it's important to coordinate export controls with allies and partners. I also believe, I believe that we need to be protective of taxpayer resources. And not every single convening of export officials in foreign capitals is meaningful. And so we keep a close eye on the travel that our employees conduct.
It's been well over a year since Section 232 semiconductor tariff investigations was initiated. Can you give us a status update, and can you commit to a rough time frame for when industry and Congress should expect a determination?
I'm sorry, for which investigation?
The Section 232 semiconductor tariff investigation.
The investigation's complete. The president issued a proclamation, and it described several phases. So that's already happened.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Representative Fine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary Kessler, for being here today and answering all of our questions. I've got a few, because I think really what you're doing is incredibly important. So under President Trump, he's placed BIS as the cornerstone of his AI action plan and America First trade policy. One of the key components of these policies is ensuring that U.S. exports American AI to our allies and partners to prevent their dependence on our strategic rivals' technology. Now, I'm particularly concerned about the exposures of our allies to a malign AI full stack. We don't want foreign AI to become the standard. We'd like our AI stack at all parts of the value chain to become the standard. It's VHS versus Betamax, except one of them is American and one of them is not. And so that's why I have filed a bill in HR 6996, the Full AI Stack Export Promotions Act, which was marked up and passed in this committee. Unfortunately, ongoing delays in license approvals and confusion over the future of the AI diffusion rule have caused uncertainty and hampered exports to allies and partners. Can you comment on BIS's role in facilitating the export of U.S. AI to our allies?
Well, I agree with you that it's important to encourage our allies to build and invest in the American tech stack. It's essential. And that's part of the thinking behind the action that we took recently with the UAE, behind the Middle East deals that we've been doing. We want to encourage these companies to build on the American tech stack, to invest also in the United States, in our tech ecosystem. So the administration and I personally agree with that 100%. Your question referenced some confusion, but I don't think there has been confusion about the rules. I think the rules have been clear. And I don't think either that there have been, you mentioned licensing, and the timelines for licensing for routine licenses have been quite fast. They've been pretty much the same since 2024, but we do apply a high level of scrutiny to those licenses that involve sensitive technologies.
Okay. So what you've mentioned at a high level, but what specific actions are you taking to speed up the licensing process? And can you give some clarity on if BIS plans to formally replace the AI diffusion rule with something else?
Right. I don't want to replace the diffusion rule because I don't think the rule is worth replacing. Okay. It's a bad rule, and we're glad that it's gone. We're glad that it's not being enforced, and it would have stymied the global AI ecosystem. So we don't want to replace it. There will be future regulatory action in the area of chips and AI. It's a quickly evolving area, and the rules need to keep up with it. But we're not going to replace diffusion.
So the AI Action Plan specifically calls on BIS to encourage partners to follow U.S. export controls by using tools such as the Foreign Direct Product Rule and secondary tariffs. Allied export controls are still significantly weaker than our protocols, but BIS hasn't yet used these tools to achieve alignment. Are there certain authorizations that you don't have that prevent you from doing what you need to do, which we could work on here in Congress to help you?
Well, I think we have the authority. I think that, the administration is constantly attending to, both myself and BIS and the administration as a whole, constantly attending to this issue of disparity between our export control regime and those of our partners and allies. And as I mentioned previously, we're set on remedying those disparities.
Well, I appreciate everything you do. As someone who Iran just turned into a Lego figure last night, I think the influence of AI around the world is it can be good and it can be bad. And I certainly hope as we move forward, it's us that are in charge and not bad guys. So thank you for being here. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Absolutely.
I would love to see that Lego figure. Representative Dean, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Mast and Ranking Member Meeks for holding this hearing. Thank you, Undersecretary Kessler, for being here and giving us updates and informing us today. Undersecretary, last year you testified that one of your top priorities was to bolster enforcement by adding staff. I wanted to follow up on that. Given the budget increase BIS got last year, what progress have you made in bolstering resources, staffing focused on enforcement?
Well, this year we've hired, and I can get you the exact numbers after the hearing, but we've hired about 70 people, added about 70 people, and almost all of them are in enforcement. And we're going to continue to do that through the end of the fiscal year. We have already selected more candidates to add to enforcement. There should be about 60 more coming in the door by the end of
That was my next question.
by
What
the end of the fiscal
vacancies do
year.
you have?
Yeah, and that includes the additional export control officers that I was discussing with other members. So on that front, we'll go from 12 to 25.
How many vacancies total?
Well, we are aiming to onboard about 60 more people by the end of this fiscal year. And then, of course, if the budget request is approved, then we'll have hundreds more in the following
Yeah, the
fiscal
budget
year.
request is nearly double. So,
Right.
Yeah, okay. Undersecretary, I am worried that U.S.-made technologies, including microchips, continue to be found in Russian military systems, deeply undermining our support for Ukraine and fighting back against Russia's illegal war of aggression. And I know many of my colleagues have raised these things. I'm troubled by the weakening of export controls in this administration. As others have discussed, BIS has not added a single entity to the entity list since October of last year. It's at its lowest level, if I'm reading the charts correctly, since 2008, no doubt eroding the efficacy of the list. Is staffing an issue there? Why have you not added others to the entity list?
Well, I have a different perspective, that enforcement of the list is critical.
I did hear you say that,
yeah.
but let's talk about adding of entities. Of course, I encourage enforcement. Let's talk specifically about adding entities.
When we see a national security risk, we respond forcefully, whether it's through adding an entity to the list. We also have other tools available, including informed letters, including enforcement actions, and other authorities.
Are you concerned? Are you concerned when you see that gap, October till now? Are you concerned? Do you question your team and say, what's going on here? Why have we not added anything?
That's not how I measure success. My perspective is that enforcement is extremely strong now. It's stronger than it ever has been, and that's the path that we need to continue on.
What has enforcement gotten us?
Enforcement has gotten us stronger deterrence. It's gotten us, an awareness within the business community that export controls aren't merely a cost of doing business. They're something that companies actually need to plan around and change their behavior around. I think
Why are these technologies still showing up in Russian military equipment?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that the penalties ought to be even higher. That's partly something that we can achieve through a legislative fix.
Of course, the penalties on Russia should be higher also. I
Sure,
would
yeah,
say that.
penalties across the board. Right, there's a statutory cap on penalties, which we think should be higher. But the types of situations that you're referring to, this leads to enforcement actions, right? If we see that U.S. technology is recovered on the battlefield of a country that shouldn't have those technologies, it leads to enforcement actions, which can lead to penalties, which can lead to deterrence.
Let me dig down on the Russia piece specifically. How many staff at BIS are focused solely on enforcement with regard to Russia? You can imagine, like so many of us, totally engaged in Ukraine, and why in God's name we have not been more effective in bringing peace to Ukraine and putting down this aggressive set of moves and war crimes by Mr. Putin. So how many staff are focused solely on enforcement with regard to Russia?
Well, we don't.
The number.
We don't split up. Generally, we don't split up officials that way, like devote them to individual countries. But we do have at least dozens of staff members who are focused on country group D5 countries and enforcement issues there.
Well, I know my time is up, and I thank you. We're all concerned that BIS is under-resourced, but I very much worry. How are those resources being used, and how are we really curtailing the malign things that are going on? So I thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Representative Moylan? No. Okay, then we will go to Representative, we going to Miller or Burchett? Miller. Miller, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I'll take advantage of my opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary Kessler, for taking the time to meet with us today. When we think about strategic competition with the People's Republic of China, most folks probably think about the Department of War, the CIA, or maybe even the State Department. But one extremely important and often overlooked agency on the front lines of this fight is the Bureau of Industry and Security, also known as BIS, at the Department of Commerce. What should make every American proud is the fact that the road to success for the CCP runs through the theft of American technology and talent, not their own. It is for that reason that no other country on earth spends more time and money trying to steal our technology and trying to get the edge other than China. Fortunately, we have BIS to enforce our export controls to stop them. However, current statute is not without loopholes and workarounds that our enemies exploit. Under the Export Control and Reform Act, the definition of foreign person is too narrow to include the U.S. incorporated affiliates of companies that are subject to export controls, meaning that all an entity list company must do is access sensitive technology is to establish a U.S. affiliate company, which seems to be pretty easy to do. I introduced the Adversaries Act to have the Office of Information and Communications Technology and Services evaluate this loophole and enhance BIS's ability to address this problem that we currently have. Undersecretary Kessler, once again, thank you for being here. Sure, it's going to be a little bit longer, shouldn't be too much longer. Under your leadership, has BIS looked into this problem, and do you believe that an expansion of BIS authority to list U.S. incorporated entities affiliated with foreign adversarial companies on the entities list is necessary?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I obviously we spend a lot of time on enforcement issues related to the entity list. As I mentioned, one of the priorities has been to make licensing more effective as regards companies that are on the entity list. Right? We shouldn't be rubber stamping license applications for exports to companies on the entity list. In general, I support legislation that would expand Commerce's enforcement authority. And so I'm happy to take a look at the legislation that you mentioned and work with you on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Michael from our team has been doing a fantastic job, and we will get it over to you and your team so we can hammer out the issues. But it's definitely something that we could work together and find a lot of common ground.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
Sounds
definitely.
great. Thank you.
And just, can you give us some insight into how widespread, really this problem is, or that you're seeing? And as I'm talking about it, do we have, good visibility into instances where our adversaries are using this, circumvention tactic right now?
We know that there is a lot of circumventing and diversion that goes on all the time. We don't know the full extent of it, but we can guess based on our experience. Also, just based on the caseload that our enforcement officers have, They have an enormous number of cases and leads per agent, which suggests that there's, as I mentioned in my testimony, far more than their counterparts at peer enforcement agencies, and that suggests that there, unfortunately, is a lot of enforcement activity. A lot of violation that goes undetected, and so that's part of the reason that we're asking for the budget increase for enforcement.
Yeah, no, I believe it is needed, and you guys are doing a phenomenal job. And thank you for making sure our country is safe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you,
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Undersecretary Kessler, thank you for being here today. The Bureau of Industry and Security plays an important role in enforcing our nation's export controls, protecting our critical industries, and securing our most sensitive technologies. These issues have been among my key priorities during our tenure in Congress, and I'm very proud to have introduced the bipartisan Whistleblowers Aiding National Security Act, which would ensure that whistleblowers have a protected pathway to the State Department to report export control violations. I wanted to acknowledge Representative Keene and his shout out to my bill while he was here during his time, and to the importance of it. Many members today have asked you about the importance of export controls and whistleblower protections. And I think through some of your prior testimony, you acknowledge that this is a very important tool that the federal government has.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, as I mentioned in response to the other question, we have significant enforcement activity, leads, cases that are the product of whistleblower reports. So I think this is an important part of our enforcement practice.
Yes, and so, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we can, I know this has passed through the committee. I would love to see it on the floor and get this thing through the finish line. Because I do think that whistleblowers play a critical role in our export control environment in particular. You've had a lot of questions from both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of concern here in the Congress over China having an unfair advantage in the AI race, and making sure that we have U.S. dominance in that space. And I hope you're hearing the concerns, sir, that this committee has about the lack of updating of our lists. The lack, and your defense of that hasn't really answered anyone's questions about why new actors aren't being added to our monitoring lists. It's very concerning to us because Russia's consistently renaming companies, new companies are morphing into different entities, and there is a gap. And I hope that if, rather than taking a very defensive posture on that topic, that you'll listen to the concerns of members of both sides of the aisle on this issue, and you'll go back and take a good hard look at the practices that your agency has been engaging in to address this gap of our security, because it's something that this body, our members on this committee, are very, very concerned about. Another issue, I wanted to talk about China for a second. In April, over 70 of my colleagues and I signed on to a letter led by Congresswoman Dingell opposing backdoor market access for Chinese automakers in the U.S. The Biden administration's Department of Commerce implemented strict restrictions on these imports, and yet this administration recently announced an exemption for at least one China-connected automaker. Since your bureau granted the exception, the Chinese government released new standards requiring all new vehicles to support continuous monitoring, data recording, and remote management. So you granted an exception for China to have an automaker in this country, that after that exemption was granted, then China reformed its rules requiring continuous surveillance. I'm very, very concerned about that, sir. So how are you going to mitigate the concerns that a China-connected company that you granted an exemption to one day can be required by the Chinese government to fill software with spyware on our people?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify that I think the rule that you're referring to, the Trump administration is the only administration that's implemented this rule. The prohibitions kick in model year 2027, which is now. We are the ones who are leading the implementation and enforcement of this rule. Now, you're asking about a particular, we call them specific authorizations. It's a license essentially for companies to operate in the United States, continue to sell despite the prohibitions that are in place under this rule. And what I can tell you is that we ensure that there are very strong national security conditions in any license of that type, very robust conditions, which would prevent the exfiltration of data to a foreign adversary. We ensure that the tech stack is clean, and we put safeguards in place to make sure that that's the case.
Well, sir, I'm running out of time, but I just want to end with, obviously, it's very concerning that we would grant exemptions to Chinese companies in this country, given their assault on our technological security. And I think it's something that the administration needs to look at very closely, and I'm out of time. I yield back.
Mr. Kessler, you have the distinct honor of witnessing a new member here, Representative Gallagher, who just joined our committee. It is committee tradition that new members give us a fun fact about themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be joining the committee, and thank you for that opportunity. I think maybe the fun fact is I'm a sixth-generation Californian. So my family, came to this great country, settled in California, and we liked the place. So, we stayed a while.
It's not really tradition, but thanks for giving us a fact.
Thank you.
What part of California is this?
This is Northern California, just south of Yuba City, California, Mr. Chairman.
Max Miller.
I'd love to have you sometime out.
Look forward to joining you. Max Miller could have warned you, but he chose also not to warn you, though. Mess with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized. You can ask all the questions you want right now. You get 10 minutes. No, you get 5. I'm just kidding.
I am good. I've been listening very much to the conversation. I think very interesting conversation right there. California, actually, our governor has done a lot of exemptions and benefits for Chinese companies. So I'm very glad to see some real enforcement from your department on that front and ensuring that we don't allow those types of things to happen. So congratulate you on that work. Obviously, these are very important to us to ensure that we're not having trying to get smuggled technology, and so I appreciate your work, and we'll continue to be monitoring that and working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll leave you alone. Representative Burchett, you ready, my friend? Number 1 in our hearts.
435 on the chart. Thank you, sir. Mr. Undersecretary, I'm going to ask you several questions, and as the 435th most powerful member of Congress, I usually go towards the end of most of these discussions, so
We just went over this, Tim. He's number 435.
Do what?
He's new. He's number 435. You can't be 435
You can't
anymore.
just step in and take my spot, Mr. Chairman. But what I reclaim my time? No, I hate it when people say that. That sounds so arrogant. But anyway, I want you to act like every one of my questions is one of the most brilliant questions you've ever heard, since I'm sure you've already heard them multiple times. And as Max Miller droned on about something, I wasn't really even sure what he was paying attention to. He told me I don't pay attention very well, and I really not, and he mumbled something about that. I wasn't really paying much attention when he told me that. So, sir, how is the Bureau of Industry and Security planning to align its priorities with U.S. national security interests?
Well, strong enforcement. It starts with strong enforcement, sir.
Is your microphone on?
I'm sorry, is there what?
I couldn't hear you.
Oh. Is that better?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, it starts with strong enforcement. We have extensive rules that restrict the exports of goods and software and technology to foreign adversaries. We need to enforce those rules. In the past, that hasn't happened. And that's why our budget request focuses on stronger enforcement, bigger enforcement, and making sure that we have an effective deterrent in place.
It didn't pass over my publicly educated brain that my colleagues across the aisle, when they tend to forget that they were in power for 4 years and it was pretty much wide open, and now you're seeing the adults in the room and they're acting as if something that they got the rug jerked out from under them. I find that kind of odd. I'm sure you do too, but increased export controls can lead to overregulation of American businesses while countries like China bypass the system. Do y'all have an oversight mechanism to combat that?
I'm sorry, to combat what?
Combat, let me go back over it. I'll just restate the question, if that's all right. I reclaim my time. Increased export controls can lead to over-regulation of American businesses.
I see. Yeah, no, I mean, of course we want to avoid overregulation, right? And as I mentioned in response to some of the other questions, more regulations don't equate to more safety. We need to be careful about that. Export controls, they carry serious penalties. We want companies to invest in compliance. But because of that, we need to be careful when we impose new requirements that we're not, we're not forcing companies to overinvest in something that doesn't have a national security dividend.
Okay, why is the Bureau of Industry and Security licensing process so time-consuming?
Well, for the vast majority of licenses, the process is fast and efficient. Right? As I mentioned in response to some of the other questions, the average processing time in 2025 is about the same as in 2024, and that's 60 days. For many types of licenses that for different reasons can be approved more quickly, they are, sometimes in a matter of weeks. The licenses that we apply more scrutiny to, there's a reason. The licenses that involve sensitive technologies, that involve entity-listed companies, that involve sensitive regions of the world, those are the ones that we are very careful with. And I think, again, I think that that's the appropriate way to handle those kinds of licenses because we don't want rubber stamping.
Do y'all have a plan to expedite any of that that you have delays with?
We want to expedite all of it, right? The goal is to make all licenses go through the system as quickly as possible, but we don't want to compromise national security.
I think sometimes we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater on that, and I agree with you on that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my 36 seconds.
This is the end of the hearing. I mean, do you want to close it out, Mr. Burchett?
Maybe a little song.
If that's what you like. If I know it, I'll join you.
That's okay. I'm a semi-professional singer, as you know, and this is not a union setting, so I'd be violating my
like
oath.
Tennessee River or something? You don't want to sing that?
No.
Okay. All right. Fair
Thank
enough.
you so much, though.
You're welcome. Another day. Undersecretary Kessler, thank you for joining us today. I see no more individuals requesting to ask you questions. Thank you for your valuable testimony. I thank members for their questions. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, Undersecretary. We will ask that you respond to those in writing, and this committee stands adjourned.